Let's start with a confession. I have used AI to help me write parts of this episode. Not the whole thing, not the personal stuff, but some of the scaffolding, some of the research polls, and some of the early drafting and outlining. And I have also, in the last 2 years, used AI to build coaching tools, build enterprise learning platforms, build video-based skill development programs, and launch an AI coach into a restaurant organization with the help of the technology company we used. And in that same 2 years, I have watched AI generate brilliant insights I would have not reached necessarily on my own. And I have watched it confidently produce completely plausible nonsense that would have embarrassed me if I had not caught it. And maybe some of it I didn't. So this is not an episode about whether AI is good or bad for your brain. That question is too big and probably too early to talk about. This is an episode about something more specific. What does it actually look like week to week to work with these tools as a thinking professional? What do they genuinely add to our lives? And what do they quietly erode? And what does the neuroscience tell us about how to stay sharp while we use them? As you can see, Phil is not with us for this episode. Some of what you'll hear today would normally be his territory, the neuroscience of how we form habits of thought, the mechanisms of cognitive offloading, what happens to the brain when we reliably outsource a task. I'll do my best with those pieces, but I'll also be doing something Phil usually handles, the mechanistic explanation. For the bulk of the episode, though, I'm in my natural territory, a practitioner talking about what he's built, what I've broken, and what I've also learned. The question I want to sit with today is this. When you hand part of your thinking to a machine, what exactly are you handing over? And what are you keeping? Welcome to My BrainWise Coach. I'm Cole Bastian and I'm flying solo today. Phil is out as his computer is crashing on us, but he will be back next week. But the subject matter of this episode is personal enough that I thought it made sense to carry it on my own. Today, we're talking about AI, specifically my own 2-year experience using AI as a thinking partner across some very different projects. For example, building the BrainWise Enterprise platform currently in development, building out our VILT program materials for our certification program, using AI-generated and AI-supported video for skill development, and the work I did while launching AI Coach at HOA Brands, partnering with the company Tattle. And I want to be practical about this, where it's helped, where it's hurt, and some of what the neuroscience of cognition tells us about how to use these tools without letting them use us. But a quick plug, if this show helps you think differently about how your brain works, please leave us a 5-star rating and review wherever you get your podcast, and like, comment, share, and subscribe on all of our social platforms. You can find us everywhere at My BrainWise Coach. So one framing note before we get into it. I'm not going to try to tell you whether AI is going to transform your industry or ruin your children's attention spans. I do not know these things, and the people claiming to know them usually may not either. There's some obvious discussion and research that we talked about previously with Tanya around AI psychosis and AI-induced psychosis, and some of the other implications from a psychological perspective. Those are real. What I can talk about with some precision is what it is like to build things with these tools, what the cognitive costs and benefits look like in practice, and where the research on human cognition maps onto that experience. That's the scope of today, so let's get into it. I want to start with the genuine case for these tools, because I think the critical version of this conversation lands harder if it's preceded by an honest account of what they actually give you. The first thing, and this is not a small thing, is velocity. Not speed exactly, velocity. The ability to move a draft, a framework, a structure from zero to something testable in a fraction of the time it would have taken before. And what that unlocks is not just efficiency, it's iteration count. If I can produce a rough version of something in 20 minutes instead of 4 hours, I can run the test earlier. I can get feedback earlier. I can also fail earlier and cheaper, which is great. The total quality of the output is often higher, not because the AI is writing better than I would, but because I got my third or fourth iteration in the same time I used to spend on the first. So one of the things I want to talk about from a personal perspective here is where I'm currently building out with Phil's assistance and guidance, our BrainWise Enterprise platform, which is going to be an all-encompassing platform for our personal threat profile and 4 new AI transformation instruments that we have been working on over the past many months. And I am not a software engineer. I have never done it before. I have done user experience testing, and I've used a 100 of these. That's an exaggeration, of course, but I've used many of these tools or the softwares with other organizations in my past experience. So I know what both the organization is looking for, what the individual, so someone who's just buying into it on their own, is looking for, what a coach who's going to use these instruments in their coaching practice is looking for, etc. So I know all those lenses. So from a user perspective, I'm well equipped. But it's been an interesting ride and journey, and I'll just share I've been using several tools to help make this possible. One is Claude. I'm not someone who typically puts my stamp on, many things, but Claude is a powerful thinking partner, powerful programmer, and really helps to challenge me in a variety of ways. And I've given a gender and obviously a name here, but that particular tool has been extremely helpful in me being able to build out the BrainWise Enterprise platform, because I use that tool to ideate on what the next part of our scope should be for building out the platform. He then writes all of the code for me based off my exact explicit expectations, based off of existing code that's already in the platform. I then copy and paste it into whether it's the database or it's the email sending tool or the payment collection tool or the AI console we've set up, or if he's giving me the prompts to post into Lovable, which is doing also a big portion of the front end part of the coding. And so those are the tools that I'm using, and they have, within a matter of, I would say I've worked on it now for 3 days in total, I have been able to produce all 4 assessments, the reports, the coach portal, and am now working on the organization lens and then the super admin lens after that. This kind of software development in the past would have taken a year or more to do without the help of AI. So I give you that story so we can transition back in, to our conversation. The second thing I want to name is a little more subtle, and I did not see it coming. The act of writing a good prompt itself is a thinking exercise. To get a useful output from one of these tools I've mentioned, you have to specify what you actually want. You have to name your audience, your constraints, your goals, your tone, and your non-negotiables. And if you cannot specify those things, the output is just as bad as the input. Not because the AI tool is bad, but because the thinking behind the request was incomplete. I've had the experience more than once of sitting down to prompt an AI on a piece of work, and in the process of writing the prompt, realizing I did not actually know what I was trying to build. Therefore, I used AI as a thought partner instead. That's a learning. The prompt became the brief I should have written for myself before I started. The tool exposed a gap in my own thinking that I would have not seen otherwise. So another example of where this has come up in outside of the BrainWise Enterprise platform, which I could talk about that all day, is the VILT, so a virtual instructor-led training session, which is for a certification program that includes VILTs. It also includes, 19 modules that people are going through, as well as PTP debriefs, essentially an entire coaching certification program for others, coaches specifically, to go through so they can become a PTP certified coach to debrief others on their PTP, their personal threat profile. And normally, that particular program, just the VILT materials, facilitators guides, PowerPoints for what is now a 9-hour program would have taken anywhere from 70 to 90 hours. Okay, so let's just call it 2 weeks. I was able to, with Claude, build out all of the materials, both the facilitator guides, the PowerPoints, and all the ancillary support materials, email templates, checklists, participant materials, all of it in, let's say, 10 hours. That's a significant reduction. Now, the challenge in this case was I didn't know exactly how to structure all of this. I didn't know exactly what I wanted. And so instead of putting a prompt in to Claude saying, here's what I want you to do, I said, Claude, let's work together and ideate and go through my thoughts and what I want to have happen and ultimately the net goal of this. And then I want you to build out the prompt that I should use and help me structure it so we can get the right facilitators guides at the right time. And so I highly suggest that because at first the challenge was I was writing these long prompts because I'm, kind of just a stream of consciousness kind of person. And then ultimately the output I was receiving was not nearly as powerful as when I gave Claude the stream of consciousness and he helped formulate it into the actual structure of what we were going to accomplish. So instead of it just being a tool to accomplish the work, it also became the thought partner to instruct it because it knows how to instruct itself better than I do on what to actually do. And now the third thing is scope expansion. There are categories of work that before AI, I simply would not have taken on because the ratio of value to effort did not work. For example, the BrainWise Enterprise platform. I had no idea how to do it. I'm not a coder. I would have never, ever even attempted it without AI. Building a first pass curriculum also across 6 modules in a week, or producing video-based scenarios for skill practice at a volume that would have taken a production team months. Drafting role-play scripts at the granularity we need for virtually instructor-led training sessions. These were not quality problems, they were capacity problems. And what AI has done is move some of those previously impossible projects into the realm of tractable. So another example is for these kind of the BrainWise PTP debrief coaching certification. Not only did we need all the ancillary materials, facilitator's guide, and the PowerPoint to go with it, we also needed some asynchronous, meaning kind of doing learning on your own videos or modules, because there's all these different topics and things. You can't teach everything in a virtual instructor-led training session because you need them to use that time to actually skill practice. And so we recorded, my partner and I, Phil, of course, we recorded all of the videos and I used AI in a couple of ways. One, to help build the script for these videos, because in instructional design, you usually spend hours scripting that particular set of materials. And these videos are on average 7 minutes piece. So that's a significant amount of scripting time, probably 10 hours just to script it. What I was able to do is take the content that we wanted to cover, put it into the AI tool, and it produced the scripts that we then could follow. I then took the actual transcript of what we talked about, put it into a PowerPoint building tool, specifically Notebook LM, and it produced supporting PowerPoint for the actual session or for the actual videos. And so I had to create a specific prompt for Notebook LM to be able to follow exactly without it just iterating whatever the heck I wanted to build. And so all of this would have been totally impossible to do all of that and edit the videos and build the platform and do the coaching certification all in the last, let's say, 4 weeks. Just would have been impossible before using AI and before it became so mainstream. And what connects all 3 of these topics that we've talked about is that AI is not replacing me. It is extending the range of what I can attempt. It is collapsing the cost of my first draft so that I can spend my cognitive budget on higher leverage work, editing, synthesizing, and deciding what matters. That is, I think, the honest, positive case, and it's a real one. And here's where it gets more complicated. The same velocity I just praised has a shadow effect. And I want to be specific about what it is. These tools generate fluent, confident, structurally correct output. That is what they're built to do, their machine. What they are not built to do is distinguish between fluent, correct output and fluent, incorrect output. The output itself looks the same either way. The AI does not know the difference. And critically, if you are working at the edge of your own expertise, you may not either. I have had AI produce citations that looked perfect and did not actually exist. Happened all the time with ChatGPT. frameworks that sounded sophisticated and were internally incoherent. Role play dialogue that read naturally and contained subtle behavioral assumptions I would have never, ever endorsed. In every case, the error was catchable. In every case, catching it required me to slow down, to engage the part of my thinking that the tool was supposed to be helping me skip. That is the trap. The tool is fastest when you trust it. It is only reliable when you don't. As Ronald Reagan said, trust but verify. And so one of the things that this happened in when I was working at HOA Brands or Hooters of America, which HOA Brands is the parent company of or was, when I was working for them, we launched something called AI Coach. It was a tool that the company Tattle actually built themselves, and it was within their customer experience platform. There was a survey measuring tool and data output. And the tool itself, they built it, but then each individual restaurant could train it, or restaurant company could train that tool to speak like us, talk like us, walk like us, LOL, just kidding, and essentially become an extension of our team members. And that particular coach was coaching managers by scouring the thousands of open-ended comments that would come in from guests, connecting them to the quantitative data points that were within the system, and determining these are the 3 interventions that you need to focus on, or the 5 things, or whatever it is, based off what the customer is actually saying to improve in these particular categories. And the actual intervention, the AI output, was exactly what we trained it to be. And so at first we went through and we, did some training. We put some boundaries in place. We gave it some parameters, and it was okay. It would pull the temperature of different things, the time of cook time for certain items, or our guest service platform. It would pull those things, but it also didn't entirely sound just like us. And so what we ended up doing was we thankfully we had a very comprehensive learning library where all of our training program materials was about as context and detail specific as anywhere you've ever seen, probably more so. And so we were able to take those tools and load them, all of the text, into the correct places within the AI tool to give it far more expansive content and context. And then what ended up happening in that case is now it became able to powerfully talk and act as if it was a Hooters team member. So it sounded just like them in the field, or as close to it as we could get to in this case. But the learning lesson here was I wouldn't say we necessarily just trusted that the output was going to be okay. What we ultimately did was we thought, okay, we're going to launch this and test it. And what we didn't recognize is that there was the level of depth that was needed to train the tool in order for it to sound like what we wanted it to sound like. So that's where the whole trust but verify piece comes in. But shout out to the folks at Tattle and to all of those at HOA Brands. When we launched that program, it had significant impact on our overall customer experience rating. It's actually one of the things I put into my book as part of the case study. There's a second failure mode that sits underneath the first that I just went through a personal story on, and it has a name from the cognitive psychology literature. David Dunning's research at Cornell established something that we now call the Dunning-Kruger effect. The short version is that people who know very little about a domain are also the least able to recognize their own lack of knowledge. They do not have the expertise to evaluate their own outputs. And here's the problem. AI is a Dunning-Kruger amplifier. It lets people who know very little about a domain produce outputs that look like the outputs of someone who knows a lot. And because the person producing those outputs does not have the expertise to evaluate them, they cannot tell which parts are correct and which parts are confident nonsense. The tool does not care. The output simply ships to you. I have seen this in organizational settings where people without L&D expertise are now producing training materials. That's been happening forever. But now with AI that look professional and contain fundamental pedagogical errors. I have seen it in coaching where people without coaching training are prompting AI to simulate coaching conversations and receiving outputs that would fail a first-year coaching certification. The output looks fine. The person producing it cannot tell that it isn't. And let's be honest and fair, it's probably an honest mistake. It's not something they're doing on purpose. The third failure mode is the one I think about most because it's the one with the longest time horizon. It's the quiet erosion. Redoing that part. It's the quiet erosion of the cognitive work that AI makes easy to skip. There is a study I want to mention here. Betsy Sparrow at Columbia published a paper in Science in 2011 called Google Effects on Memory. The finding was that when people expected information to be available to them later through an external source, they remembered less of it. Their memory strategy shifted. They stopped encoding the information itself and started encoding where to find it. The study has been replicated and extended many times since. It established something we now call cognitive offloading. The brain is efficient. If it knows a task is going to be handled externally, it reallocates resources elsewhere. A 2025 study by Michael Gerlich, published in the Journal of Societies, looked directly at AI use and critical thinking. The finding was that heavy AI users, particularly young users, showed reduced critical thinking scores, and the relationship was mediated by cognitive offloading. A Microsoft research study the same year surveyed 319 knowledge workers and found that higher self-reported confidence in AI on a given task correlated with reduced critical engagement on that task. The pattern is consistent. When we trust the tool, we stop doing the thinking the tool is doing for us. And over time, that thinking atrophies the way any unused capacity atrophies. Now, this is not an indictment, because I use it quite a bit, AI. I use it a lot. Cognitive offloading is not new. We started doing it the moment we invented writing. Calculators offloaded arithmetic. GPS offloaded spatial reasoning. Every tool that takes something off our plate also takes something off of our brain. The question is not whether to offload. The question is what to offload and what to keep. And I want to spend some time on the neuroscience because I think it sharpens the practical question. Of course, this is normally Phil's territory, but I'll do my best. Daniel Kahneman's framework from thinking fast and slow is a useful starting point. Kahneman described two modes of cognition. System 1 is fast, automatic, pattern-based. It runs on existing knowledge and produces answers before you've consciously decided to produce them. System 2 is slow, deliberate, effortful. It engages when a problem is novel, when the stakes are high, or when System 1's answer doesn't satisfy. System 2 is metabolically expensive. The brain does not love running it. Given a choice, it will defer to System 1 whenever System 1 can plausibly handle the task. This is not a flaw, it is efficient design, but it has an implication for AI use that I don't think we've fully absorbed. When AI is available, it functions, cognitively, as an extension of System 1. It produces a fast, fluent, pattern-based answer. The brain's natural tendency is to accept that answer and not engage System 2, because System 2 is expensive, and the answer is right there. The problem is that AI output, unlike most System 1 output, is disconnected from your own expertise. Your own System 1 has been trained by your experience. It knows what it knows. AI's System 1-like output has been trained by a statistical pattern across the internet. It does not know what it doesn't know. And your brain is inclined to treat its output as if it came from the same place your intuitions came from, because that's the cognitive slot AI fills. So the practical move, and this is backed up by the Microsoft study I mentioned earlier, is that working well with AI requires deliberately engaging System 2 on outputs that System 1 would let slide. You have to force the metabolically expensive review on purpose, even when the output looks fine. Especially when the output looks fine. Because the looks fine is exactly the signal your brain uses to skip System 2. There's a second neuroscience angle I want to name, which is about trust calibration. The brain builds trust models from experience. When a source gives you correct information repeatedly, you trust it more and scrutinize it less. This is adaptive. It's how expertise forms. You don't rederive every conclusion from first principles once you have a reliable source. But this mechanism misfires with AI in a very specific way. AI is right often enough that the trust model calibrates upward, but the errors, when they come, and they often do, are not distributed the way a human expert's errors are distributed. A human expert's errors tend to be at the edges of their knowledge, in places where they have appropriate uncertainty. AI's errors are uniformly confident. The error rate might be, say, 10%, but you cannot tell which 10% always. And your trust model, built on the 90% that's right, will not flag the 10% that isn't. This is a hard problem. It's not solved by just don't trust AI, because that throws away the genuine value it brings. It is solved by something closer to what scientists do. Treat every output as provisional. Verify the high-stakes claims. And build domain-specific calibration for where the tool is reliable and where it is not. That's cognitive work. It's the cognitive work the tool is asking you to keep doing. The moment you stop, the tool becomes more dangerous, not less. Which brings me to what I think is the actual practitioner question. Not should I use AI, not is AI good or bad for thinking. The practitioner question is this: what cognitive work should I offload to the tool, and what cognitive work should I protect from it? I'll give you my working answer, with the caveat that this is 2 years of practice, not a research-backed conclusion. Offload the work where your judgment happens after the output, not before it. Drafting, summarizing, restructuring, formatting, brainstorming, producing variations. In all of these cases, the tool produces material, and then your expertise evaluates it. The evaluation is where your thinking lives, and the evaluation is preserved. Protect the work where your judgment happens during the cognitive process, not after. Framing, diagnosis, strategic choice, deciding on what matters, and deciding what to do next. These are the places where the act of thinking through the problem is the value. If you offload them, you do not get their output without also losing the cognitive muscle that produced it. That muscle is, in most professional domains, the thing that you are actually being paid for. And BrainWise friends, I want you to sit with that distinction. Offload where judgment happens after the output. Protect where judgment happens during the thinking. That is the single most useful heuristic I have without letting them hollow out the capacity I need to stay good at what I do. Now, I want to land this somewhere practical, because the conversation about AI and cognition is often pitched at a level that doesn't actually change what anyone does on Monday morning, sometimes myself included. So here are 4 moves I've tested in my own practice. They're not rules, they're experiments you can run this week and see what happens. Before you open the AI, spend 60 seconds writing down in your own words what you are trying to produce and why. Not the prompt, the brief. Who is this for? What does success look like? What are my non-negotiables? What is the one thing that cannot go wrong? This is what I talked about with what I do with Claude, specifically for the BrainWise Enterprise platform or the coaching certification I've been building. I sit and have a conversation with myself, dictating it into a Word document, all the things that I'm thinking about, what I wanted to do, what I don't want it to do, what I think we should certify in, what we shouldn't, and all the different activities I might want to include or the different modules in the program, whatever it might look like. Then I plop that big old brief right into Claude, who then helps me structure it and think through how the tool itself can make that possible. Sometimes I'll ask for ideas based off of what it's doing, like with the BrainWise Enterprise platform. When it comes to coding software, I am not the expert. I don't know how to do that. I can look at patterns. I can look and see where things are, what the logic is. But beyond that, I trust the tool to do that. And quite honestly, that's probably one of the greatest advancements AI is doing right now, is helping software be engineered in a expeditious fashion by someone who doesn't have all the expertise in the actual coding. So once you've done all of that thinking and you've written it down, then what I want you to do is write the prompt. If you cannot write the brief, you are not ready to prompt. The tool will produce something, but it will be answering a question you have not clearly asked yourself. And you will spend the time you thought you were saving on iterating a direction that was wrong to begin with. Before you use AI output in anything consequential, decide what verification that output needs to pass before it ships. If it contains factual claims, you're going to verify the sources. If it contains a framework, you're going to pressure test the logic. If it contains a persuasive argument, you're going to check what it's quietly assuming about the audience. Decide this before the output looks good to you. Because once it looks good, your motivation to verify drops significantly. The verification layer is a commitment you make to yourself, while the stakes are still abstract. This is the one I talked about in the last segment, and I want to name it again as an explicit move. For any piece of work, ask yourself, does my judgment enter after the output is produced or during the thinking that produces it? If after, offload freely. If during, do the thinking yourself, even if the tool could produce something that looks plausible. You are not saving time by offloading your thinking. You are losing the cognitive capacity you need to stay good at your work. The short-term savings are real, yes, but the long-term cost is larger than it looks. Additionally, once a month, look at what you used AI for and ask a hard question. In which of these cases did I get a better output than I would have produced alone? And in which cases did I get a faster output that was not actually better? This distinction matters. Faster is not the same as better. If you're using AI to produce faster outputs that are slightly worse than what you would have produced alone, you're trading quality for speed without even knowing it. The trade is sometimes the right one, but you want to be making it consciously, not discovering 6 months from now that your baseline quality has drifted downward. And one last thing before we close. The measurement question I get asked most often about AI is my output better? I think that's the wrong question to ask alone. The better question is, am I better? Am I a sharper thinker, a more skilled practitioner, a more capable version of myself than I was before I started using these tools? If the answer is yes, the tools are serving you. If the answer is no, or worse, if you're not sure, the tools are using you. And that's a distinction worth auditing. And there are a few things that I would like to leave you with today. The first is that we are very early in this expedition of AI. 2 years into widespread access to tools like these, and we are still figuring out which questions are the right ones. I am skeptical of anyone, including myself, who tells you with confidence what AI is going to do your thinking, your career, or take over your industry over the next decade. We simply do not know. What we can do is pay attention to what's happening in our own work in close to real time and adjust as we learn. The second thing is that the practitioner posture matters more than the position. People who are actively building with these tools, catching their failures, developing calibration, iterating on how they use them, are learning things that neither the evangelists nor the critics are learning. If you work in a domain these tools are touching, build something with them, something real. You will develop intuitions in 6 months of practice that no amount of commentary will produce. The third thing, and this is maybe the most important thing for me personally, is that the parts of my work I care about most have not been replaced by AI. They have been concentrated by it. The drafting got faster, the framing, the diagnosis, the strategic choice, the moments of real skill, those got more important, not less. The tool has raised the floor on what mediocre output looks like. It has not raised the ceiling on what excellent work looks like. Excellent work still requires the thing it always has required: attention, judgment, taste, experience, and the willingness to do the thinking that the tool cannot do for you. Phil will be back with us next week, and I suspect we'll come back to some of this in the future. In the meantime, stay curious about your own use of these tools. Notice what they give you, notice what they quietly take, and decide deliberately which trades you're willing to make. And thank you for spending time with me today, our BrainWise friends. Stay curious, stay compassionate, and always stay BrainWise.